thank you for joining me. 10 years after Brexit, 5 years after the New Year's Eve agreement, the UK-EU Treaty on Gibraltar has at last been published and will be enshrined in UK law. It sets out a new relationship with the EU and with neighbouring Spain, where an officiated border will be a thing of the past and goods and people will be able to flow freely from one territory to another. Gibraltar will give access to the Schengen area and a new customs area has been created. But it's been a highly complex negotiation with some give and take on both sides. And who knows better than the person at the centre of those negotiations, Chief Minister Fabian Picardo, who joins me now. Thank you very much for joining me. And to a lesser degree, our news editor, Christine Vasquez, who has actually read the whole treaty text. Congratulations to you. That can't have been an easy task, Christine.
It certainly was. I'm very proud of myself. I hope I've got it right.
Chief Minister, let me start by asking you, first of all, what has been the hardest aspect of this treaty to negotiate?
Well, in fact, if you think about where we were 10 years ago, we were facing the prospect of a referendum. We knew that we needed to stay in. We then found the result was not the one that we needed. We had to create what we would need in the context of the negotiation. We had to deal with a Partido Popular government that was slathering at the thought that they really had Gibraltar on a plate now. We had to understand what our fundamentals were. We had to understand our market. And we had to create, with the United Kingdom, the negotiating template. And then we had to stick to it. And there have been many voices in Gibraltar saying this is taking too long. Of course, it could have been resolved sooner if we had caved on the things that were fundamentally important to us. We haven't caved on any of those issues. We've stuck to the things that really mattered to produce a text that, of course, involves compromise, but compromises that we can live with. And that was expressed today most clearly in the Parliament by Joe Bossano, who said this is a text that we can live with.
But just to follow up on my question, was it, the customs area, managing that? Was it the sovereignty issue, any of those issues?
Look, to be fair to the Spanish government, they've been very clear, once the socialists were in power, that this was not a negotiation about sovereignty. So there was never going to be sovereignty on the table to carve up. This was a negotiation about immigration access and goods access, but of course, controls on that, etc., could create things that touched and concerned areas or ingredients of sovereignty that we had to ensure were protected from anything that we would not accept. And we've done that. We've done that work very diligently and very carefully. It has been difficult, not because there has been a grab for sovereignty, but because different people have different levels of tension when it comes to these issues, and the GSLP Liberals in Gibraltar, we're not anything other than the hawks on this issue, and we've stuck to what are our guns and our view on these issues.
Chief Minister, on that, just something to follow up on what Waz is saying. The maritime patrols, there's joint vessels, arrests by the officers of the jurisdiction. That's one of the things where what you're talking about now struck me the most, because I was thinking people are only looking at the finished text. We haven't seen from what position it started. And in something like that, I would imagine that it must have started from a pretty unpalatable first position.
Let me give you two examples. The one you've given, which is the issue of maritime controls, where the Spanish opening position, the European opening position, would have been completely unpalatable to any Gibraltarian worth his or her salt. And the issue on residence permits. The position on residence permits, which was presented to us by the European Union and by Spain, when they started the negotiation, was that Spain would in future issue residence permits for Gibraltar, because only a Schengen state could issue residence permits for people who are going to have the right to live in the Schengen area. We were able to express why, of course, that was unacceptable. Our position was that only Gibraltar could issue the residence permits, and we've reached a compromise where Gibraltar issues the residence permits, Gibraltar makes the assessment, we make the decision to issue the residence permit, we then check with the Schengen information system through Spain, and there the Schengen information system can alert us to something which should lead to us not granting the permit. Again, a compromise, not what we would have wanted. We would have wanted to stay in the European Union and have these issues, but it's where we find ourselves and having to face the realpolitik of what is negotiable with the European Union as well. This is not just Spain. Remember, you're dealing with all of the Schengen member states. They have a lot of equities in ensuring that they control who is going to become resident in Schengen, and that there isn't any member state or jurisdiction like Gibraltar, which is not a member state of Schengen, but this associated relationship with Schengen, that is able to run off and issue all the residence permits that all of the other member states of Schengen would not want to be issued. That cannot be a backdoor, an unsecure backdoor to Schengen. And so every member state that has acceded to Schengen has had to agree to compromise in certain respects. Look at the issue on short stay visas, for example. If Italy wants to issue a short stay visa to an individual, they need to check on the Schengen information system. If there is a block against that individual, because Germany says that there should not be a short stay visa issued to that individual, Italy cannot issue the short stay visa. It can then use the mechanism for Italy-only visas, which is the mechanism that we have for Gibraltar-only entry. But this is highly complex, and it's a series of compromises. And my goodness, when I was in Parliament today and I was setting out the words that Joshua Hassan used in 1972, it really resonated, how he understood then, seeing how these barriers would fall, what the compromises would be, but what that united Europe could deliver for Gibraltar. And we were embarked on that journey. We were yanked out, and we've now managed to negotiate a way back in.
Chief Minister, if I can just ask you, I know that we've had so many interviews over the past 5 years about this treaty, and you've probably touched on all the subjects before. But I have to ask you about the boots on the ground issue, because this is something that people still raise. You know, at the beginning it was no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. But now we know that there are going to be joint patrols in Gibraltar waters. We know that...
That's not boots on the ground.
Well, I know...
That's flippers in the sea.
No, but symbolically it is having a Spanish authority on Gibraltar territory.
Hang on a minute. The issue of surveillance at sea is a completely different one. It cannot be about boots on the ground, because you're talking about sea, not ground, and the issue at sea is different. But you know our position on our waters, and you know Spain's position on our waters. We have nonetheless now got a vessel that is going to be crewed jointly by those who will be representing Gibraltar and those who will be representing Spain. That will be doing work which relates to immigration, but both sides accept that when matters are not related to immigration, they will only be able to deal with the respective officers of the respective jurisdictions with other matters. Look, there's a without prejudice clause, but that's on waters outside of the port.
And
this is not
from the airport to the port?
This is not a retrocession. This is a step forward. And from the airport to the port, you need to read the text very carefully.
Which I haven't yet.
Well, I tell you what the text says, and it doesn't disclose anything that I haven't spoken about already. What the text says is that you can go and patrol from one border crossing point to another only at a time outside the fixed opening time of the border crossing points. Now, there isn't going to be a border crossing point at the port, because we're never going to establish it, because the traffic is never going to be such that we're going to allow it to become a border crossing point. So you have only the border crossing point at the airport. So first of all, there is nothing to patrol between, so no boots on the ground. And second, the border crossing point at the airport is going to be open 24 hours a day. Because although we might not have flights, we might have people arriving in a yacht who have to do clearance in that way. You might have somebody arriving in a container vessel that's doing a crew change. He needs to be cleared that day. So all of the other criteria in that article, which would enable the patrolling between crossing points, disappears. And therefore, you do not have boots on the ground. It hasn't happened. We were able to stick to the position that we considered fundamental, the assurance that we gave people. And I've seen an article in the Daily Telegraph this afternoon which suggests this. It's completely wrong, because it doesn't descend into the particulars of the text and understand the nuances that are there on the face of the treaty, but without the background knowledge and the operational knowledge of knowing that the Schengen Shack, as Christine calls it all the time, because I called it that once, is going to be open
for the
24 hours a day.
Yes.
Yes.
Chief Minister, you mentioned the things that you've been talking about earlier. Lord Hannon is someone that you have been arguing with already on Twitter this afternoon.
Well, not arguing. Daniel and I were at university together. We spent 3 years together. He's always been Brexit, even when he was 18 years old. And what I'm saying to him is, look, you've got to understand what the issues are. They are all in the Conservative Party in the UK now playing the politics of Chagos, another Chagos, Starmer, U-turns, can't be trusted, etc., etc. They're playing that politics. And what I'm saying to Daniel Hannan and to Nigel Evans, with whom I've also exchanged tweets this afternoon, is, look, this is actually part of the treaty that I negotiated alongside Conservative foreign secretaries. This is not the fruit of the work of David Lammy and Keir Starmer. This is the fruit of the work of James Cleverly, of Dominic Raab, of David Cameron, of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So there's no reason for them to now suggest that there's been a change on the fundamentals, because we've stuck to the negotiating guidelines.
But there are things that will stick in the throat of Brexiteers. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned...
if I may say so with respect, I have no time for the throats of Brexiteers. They are the ones who got us into this mess, and I've been working with my team for the past 10 years to get us out.
But you're going to have to be tweeting in the car on your way here.
I have absolutely no difficulty with that.
You did mention short-stay visas, and that is something where people will say that we have given Spain a total veto, and that they are going to be issuing those visas.
Absolutely not. That is completely wrong. I'll tell you why. If you look at the position on Schengen short-stay visas today, right? First of all, British citizens don't need a visa to visit Gibraltar or any other part of the Schengen area. We're talking about two types of third-country nationals: visa-requiring third-country nationals and non-visa requiring third-country nationals. UK citizens, United States citizens, half the world are non-visa requiring third-country nationals.
At the moment, or is that something that's going to stay? Because the EU is...
Well, I mean, at the moment, but the visa is required from nations where the economic performance is so low that you have a lot of economic migrants. There aren't a lot of economic migrants from the UK or the US into the EU. So that's how visas work. Now, when you apply for a visa today to enter the Schengen area, the criteria is twofold. First of all, you apply either to the state through which you are going to enter Schengen, or you apply to the state in which you will spend most of your time in Schengen, even if you're going to enter through another state. So let me give you an example. You're entering through Charles de Gaulle Airport in France, but you're going to spend 3 weeks in Berlin and then fly out again through Charles de Gaulle. You have the choice. You can apply through France, because you're going to enter through France, or Germany. So in Gibraltar, if you are only coming to Gibraltar, you produced a very good graphic based on the text of the treaty. If you are coming only to Gibraltar, the reality is that under the existing Schengen regulation, forget the treaty, the only Schengen state into which you are going to step is Spain. Because when you do your customs walk-through, if you're a third country national requiring a visa, you have to take the corridor that will make you step into Spain, which is where the Spanish authorities will be able to carry out their customs checks on you. So we have actually given nothing, because that is the procedure you would have had to follow pre-treaty if you had to step into Spain. And the treaty says, and this was hugely important to us, that you would, if you were coming to Gibraltar only, you would have to apply to Spain as the neighbouring member state, that is to say, not because Spain has any jurisdiction over Gibraltar, simply because it is the neighbour and because you're going to cross their Schengen border. So that is to continue with the position there was under the Schengen visa regulation and to concede absolutely nothing.
Chief Minister, when are residency rules going to be clarified and set in stone?
So I said in Parliament this afternoon that Gemma Vasquez has been charged by the Cabinet to produce the final version, the distilled version of the rules, which the Cabinet discussed on Monday. We're discussing them again this Monday. We anticipate that we won't just publish them. We anticipate that we'll want to consult a little with experts and with professionals who work in this field. So I anticipate that you'll see the publication of a draft for consultation, probably during the course of next week or the week after, and that thereafter, in time for the 10th of April, we will publish a final definitive new version of the residence rules.
And Gibraltar has sole or joint authority in terms of who it gives residency to?
Sole. So Gibraltar will decide whether somebody should get residence. And then we will do what we always do. We will check that person against the Interpol database. And now, additionally, we will check them through Spain with the Schengen Information System as well. Now, the Interpol database and the Schengen Information System should be aligned in any event in respect of these matters, but there could be circumstances in which there's information in the Schengen Information System which could be brought to our attention, which might lead to us not granting such a permit. But only we will make that determination.
OK, Christine, shall we move on to the next section, which is resources?
Yes, sorry, but I was just something that a lot of people are asking me. Will our passports change at all or anything?
No.
Because how will people know if you're in France and you want to catch a flight to Italy that you are a Schengen person?
Well, if you're in France and you're going to Italy, you never show your passport anyway. So, but I get the point that you're trying to make. So we will retain our British citizenship and our British passports, but there will be residents of Gibraltar who will have other passports. You could have somebody who is Indian and is resident in Gibraltar, Australian and resident in Gibraltar. What will matter will be your Gibraltar ID card or your new Gibraltar residence permit. For now, the civil registration cards of different colours will continue to be recognised, or will now start to be recognised. In future, all of those which are not the red ID card will become a new residence permit issued in Gibraltar, which will be valid for travel purposes in the European Union, just like our ID card is. So when you arrive, say you arrive, you've come with me to New York for the United Nations, you've decided to fly through Frankfurt. When you arrive at Frankfurt, you will go. Yeah, well, but GBC's budget obviously allows you to go first class. You'll go with your British passport and your Gibraltar ID card. And you can then go, and this will be something that will be contained in the Schengen border guide. You will go to the EU queue with your British passport and with your Gibraltar ID card, or if you're not British, with your other passport with your Gibraltar residence card, and you will be able to then go through. Of course, if you're resident in Gibraltar, but you are a European citizen, then you can go in the European queue in any event.
OK, actually, let's move on to the airport. We know that the agreement actually means that flights from all over Europe can come to Gibraltar. But
For the first time.
For the first time, but, well, we've had flights from Madrid before.
But remember that the Cordoba arrangements were only about flights from Spain, with the possibility that the flights from the rest of the European Union might be unblocked in the future. This is a treaty about flights to the whole of the European
Absolutely.
Union.
But I want to ask you this question. Is Gibraltar's landing fees and airport fees competitive enough to attract those airlines?
Well, that's a different question. And that sort of descends to the particulars of the operation of the airport. What we've always seen is that airlines, when flying to any airport anywhere in the European Union or anywhere in the world, always require assistance with marketing spend to market the route in order to be able to come to Gibraltar,
But do you have
etc.
some sort of discussions with the MOD, or, I mean, or...
The fees are not just fixed by the MOD. I mean, they're fixed by the civilian authorities
But this
as well.
changed. I remember that at the time when we actually contributed
That's
towards
right.
the runway.
So we are the ones who will be determining what the landing fee for an aircraft would be if they're using the civilian terminal, because we now pay a contribution to the MOD for the resurfacing of the runway, and therefore it's not the airline that has to pay that to the MOD. But we're in negotiation with a number of airlines to fly to Gibraltar. I think at the moment we want to make this happen by the 10th of April. We have to actually make it happen by a particular date, and then airlines, I hope, will take a view about whether they fly to Gibraltar.
That would be a nice one. That would be a popular one.
I think that would be a very, very popular one. But I would have to run 20 kilometres a day if we had flights to
It's
Italy.
true.
I'm going to New York.
First
okay,
class.
so that's first class. The Spanish checks at the frontier. We know that we've got the Schengen check. We've got aduanas on the other side of the airport. They are outside the airport on the extension that's going to be built. Will we be seeing uniformed police in our airport? Will people actually come across them? And I believe that there's also non-uniformed police, but with markings showing that they are police. Will they be visible?
So in the northeastern corner of the airport, you will have one of the new facilities that will be built, equidistant Gibraltar and Spain. Inside that facility will be Gibraltar police, who will be able to be in Spain, Gibraltar BCA and Gibraltar Customs, who will be able to be in Spain, and Spanish police, who will be able to be in Gibraltar, but only the same distance as we are able to be in Spain. This is what we explained at the time of the New Year's Eve framework agreement, and people supported because we won the election on that basis to be able to
that
negotiate
wasn't quite
this
what was in the New Year's Eve agreement, because at the time it was Frontex.
Well, that is exactly what was in the New Year's Eve framework agreement, because we were talking then about Frontex for Spain and the possibility that then Spain would come in at the end of the 4-year period, and that we would not accept that if Spain wanted to come further into Gibraltar, for example, at the port. But this is the position that we have been setting out for some time. They will be in an enclosed area, not able to access the rest of the airport. This is the northeastern corner, and that's where they will be doing at the counter the passport checks if the individual has not been able to use the electronic system because you're under 14 or for any other reason your passport cannot pass. So that's what happens on one side. On the other side, you have the Schengen exit check. So you also have uniformed Spanish police there in a system which is also equidistant into Spain and Gibraltar, with us being able to access the same distance into Spain as they can access into Gibraltar. And also the customs check for those who are arriving either from third countries or Schengen, because everyone has to go through customs, where Spanish customs is on the Spanish side of the frontier and Gibraltar customs are on the Gibraltar side of the frontier. So you shouldn't come across anyone other than behind a glass with the usual system that there is in every airport and today at the frontier, where somebody is in a booth and you show them your passport and you continue on your way, and that is what will happen to 99.9% of people. Sure. There are some circumstances where you may be required to go into the Schengen shack because second-line checks are required, but that all happens inside that common operating space, which is equidistant into Gibraltar and Spain.
Chief Minister, all being well, and you can use the electronic gates and all that, a Gibraltarian will not have to visit either Aduanas or the Schengen shack at any stage.
That is correct.
Chief Minister, we do have so many questions, but I do want to ask you about the infrastructure that's being built at the airport at the moment, and also all the facial recognition and security cameras and everything. Is everything going to be ready by the 10th of April? Everything
is going to be ready on the Gibraltar side by the 10th of April. There will be some things that will be done which may require further work to become permanent, because of course remember that we have to build the permanent facilities, and what we have to provide for temporarily cannot get in the way of where the permanent facilities are going to be. So the temporary works will look a lot more like Cordoba than the permanent works, which will look like this new treaty. Outside of the airport, you're going to see already very quickly the new facial recognition technology going up. That will be ready by the time that we have the full fluidity in place by, we hope, the 10th of April, if not later.
Could you just give us a timeline? I know you spoke about it in Parliament today, but you're expecting the UK to sign the treaty by the second week of March, you said?
So the window that opens is for the UK to be ready to sign the treaty by the end of the second or third week of March, depending on the progress also of the European Council on these issues. It's very important for us politically, and it's very important for the United Kingdom politically as well, especially given what we were discussing a moment ago about how certain Conservatives are behaving already, that Gibraltar be the one that kicks off this process, and the Gibraltar Parliament, either by the government majority or otherwise, tells the United Kingdom, Gibraltar wants this treaty. And then the United Kingdom continues through its process. Remember, the United Kingdom has already had to go through what is known as the right-around process. So that process involves all Whitehall departments confirming to Downing Street and to the Foreign Office that they are happy for the United Kingdom government to enter into these arrangements. So that is to say, none of the Whitehall departments, you might say, for example, the Home Office, the Ministry of Defence, other than the Foreign Office, have raised any objection to the final text of the treaty. Of course, they've been involved with us in the process of negotiation, but the formality of the right-around process has to be undergone. That has been undergone. That is why we've now been able to move to publication. The EU has done the same thing on its side. We now want the Gibraltar Parliament to be the trigger for the UK to continue through its processes. First signature, then once signature has happened, the UK will go through the CRAG process, and once the CRAG process is finished, which is 21 sitting days, which we anticipate will likely be after the Parliament comes back from recess after Easter, so after the 13th of April, after that the UK is ready to do final ratification. But we cannot even do provisional application if you don't have signature, and we need to have the UK in a position where it can do provisional application, that is to say, having signed before the 10th of April.
And can you have implementation with signature but not ratification?
You can have provisional application, which is that's why the treaty has a specific clause saying this is a treaty that both sides agree can have provisional application. But remember one other thing that we mustn't ignore, and I also talked about in Parliament today. In order to be able to do provisional application, you don't just have to do all of those international law things. You don't just have to do all those things on the ground, like the works at the airport and the infrastructure, etc. You have to have new laws in Gibraltar. Because under our system of governance, which is called a dualist system of government, you enter into a treaty that binds you internationally, but it has no effect in the nation itself. So, because this nation, up to and including where the frontier is on the isthmus and all of its waters, etc., is governed by the Gibraltar Parliament under the Constitution, the Gibraltar Parliament has to pass laws to ensure that these things that we are going to do become the law of Gibraltar. And so what you are going to see after we finish with the motion is that the government that needs to move to create the laws that provide for all of these things in our law, and in order to deal, as I said today, with increasing import duties, now called transaction tax, to 15, 16, 17%, and to bring in the excise duties, because those laws can only move as a finance act. When the Minister for Finance brings that bill, you'll see, first of all, a new European Communities Style Act. We used to have one, which was the one we had since 1972 that Sir Joshua was speaking on when I quoted him. It will now be the European Treaty Act. And second, a new, probably independent from that, Public Finance Act to deal with all of the taxation and excise aspects too.
Because, of course,
that's a lot to do before the 10th of April in legislative terms.
I was going to say, you know, when the UK, after Brexit, they tried to introduce all these laws and transpose EU law into, and I mean, it took them years. They were struggling.
Well, but you know that these clauses will these laws will therefore have to have what are called Henry VIII powers, which will require me to be able to amend primary legislation through regulation, but only in certain very defined circumstances, because that's not something we really want to do a lot of. And in fact, Sir Joshua was talking about that in the bill he was doing in 1972 as well.
So you'd put in a fat law that encompasses it all, and then...
A very short law that will enable us to encompass it all, use the Henry VIII power, which is not something I want to do, and we're getting close to having the same number of wives, but then doing the longer legislation when the time comes, which enables us to produce a new Immigration Act, a new Import Duties Act, or customs provisions, etc., in slower order.
Chief Minister, there is an awful lot to discuss, and we will go into some nitty-gritty detail afterwards, after the break. In particular, the business community have not been happy. They've expressed a lot of concern. They felt that they're in the dark, increasing anger at the circumstances they now face. And also there are some who say, well, look, you've presented a fait accompli, and they want to, you know, they feel that there should have been a referendum. So we'll tackle those questions. I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. We'll come back to you straight after the break. Welcome back to Viewpoint. The treaty was published today after 5 years, and I'm joined in the studio with the Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, answering questions with the news editor, Christine Vasquez. There have been some criticism. I know you've tackled this before, but some people are saying this is a fait accompli. We should have had a referendum. What do you say?
Well, look, this is not an issue that I feel has to go to a referendum because we've got a mandate to deliver this treaty. We went to the general election saying that we wanted to deliver this treaty based on the New Year's Eve Framework Agreement. We believe we have, and we believe we have the mandate now to bring it to Parliament and pass it in Parliament. But look, if anybody else has a policy that this should be put to a referendum, they should put it at the next general election, and if they win, then the treaty would go to a referendum. A referendum is what got us into this mess. And I think it would be very unwise indeed to have a referendum on a treaty as complex as this. People elect politicians to make decisions for them. We should not be expecting every citizen to make a determination on a 1,018-page treaty. It would be irresponsible for the government to expect people to give it an informed opinion on something as complex as this. And that's not the politics that I believe in.
I agree with that, but I don't think the government has a mandate. From what we heard, I mean, the details are coming out now.
Well, I think we do have a mandate because if you look at our manifesto, we said that we wanted a mandate to go and finish this treaty negotiation, and we got that mandate.
I think people are saying the details, you know, the details are...
Well, you can never... I mean, you cannot have a mandate for an 1,018-page treaty unless you put the 1,018-page treaty as an addendum to your manifesto, in which case what you're doing is a referendum at a general election on the 1,018-page treaty. Look, the politics of this is that people go off and negotiate treaties and then they become laws because they're passed by parliaments. The idea, in my view, that we live in a world where we can put... We live in such a superficial social media world that the thought that we might be able to put something like this to a referendum is for the birds. Actually, in the world of 1973 and 74 and 75, it might have been reasonable to put whether the United Kingdom remained or didn't remain in the European Union and, in effect, have a referendum on the Treaty of Rome. Today, people haven't got the attention span to understand these issues.
But 10 years ago, Chief Minister, because a lot of people didn't understand what they were voting for when they voted for Brexit, and a lot of them regret it now, and according to the polls.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I've told you that the referendum is what got us into this mess.
OK, let's have a look at another section of the community that's not very happy, and that's the business community. They have expressed concern, frustration and increasing anger about the speed of implementation and the brevity of the transition period, which is 3 months. They feel that they've been left in the dark and recent briefings just haven't been enough to prepare them. They feel very unprepared. Let me ask you, why is it taking the government so long to brief the business community on key issues affecting them, particularly as we were within kissing distance about 2 years ago?
Well, I couldn't disagree with you and the people who've expressed that view more. We have done more briefing than any other entity in this process. Indeed, the attacks on the United Kingdom government and the attacks on the government of Spain are that they've done absolutely no briefing whatsoever. So people have to understand that we were within kissing distance, but there was a lot of detail that was not yet agreed. It's the detail that people want. Even today, we don't have the forms. The Attorney General, as I've said in Parliament, is in Brussels agreeing new types of forms with the Collector of Customs and with the other relevant authorities. This detail is falling into place. It will be ready, but we have briefed as much as we have been able to with the very best intention to ensure that business has everything that it needs. What we're doing actually is going to enable business to have a much larger playing field, a much larger reach. But we understand that there are concerns because we wanted business to have longer to adapt to the new procedures, and we can't have it because this is a process that is moving against us. On the 10th of April, the new EES system will apply unless that is later extended. If that is later extended, we may be able to extend the period before the new rules applied, but that does not look like it's possible now. There may be headlines out there about Schengen having an extension of 60 to 90 days for application of EES, but that extension at the moment is only a period when the application of EES can be suspended for 6 hours in a day. That would do very little for us. Now, the letter that I've received from business actually does not read as angry or in any way deprecating, as you have suggested. The first paragraph...
I've just quoted the letter.
Yes, but quote the first paragraph. Do you have it there?
Yes, yeah.
Do me the favour then, given that you said that you're
I think
you're
I'm
quoting,
slightly out of
you're
order,
quoting the letter.
so I do have it.
Read me the first paragraph, because
I will find it for
if
you.
you read
No,
me the first
very-
paragraph, it is enormously supportive.
Here it is. Here it is.
There you go.
I'm happy to read
Let's
it.
be
They are
clear.
very supportive.
Let's be clear.
The business community overwhelmingly supports the introduction of the forthcoming UK-EU treaty in respect of Gibraltar. In both formal and informal surveys of our respective memberships, the clear majority have expressed positive views. I won't read more than that. It's very positive.
Therefore,
But
there you go.
there is a big but, though.
There is a big but, and of course there's a big but, and there's a big but for all of us, because this is a process. I mean, I'm telling you that I have to put myself through the process of legislating in the next 5 weeks at breakneck speed. This is not something that I want to do. I mean, it's intellectually taxing and it's personally very difficult. Of course it is, and it's going to be personally very difficult also for all of these traders. But we have to go through this process, because the alternative is that our services industry, which is much larger as a proportion of the GDP and indeed of the contribution to the public finances, needs to be able to have all its people coming in after the 10th of April as they do before the 10th of April. So this is a compromise again, but it's not one which the government is responsible for, because what the government would have done in order to have more time is give up on all the fundamentals that led us to continue to negotiate until the 12th of December. If we had done that, then the attack on the government, the unease and the anger would be because we would have given up on issues which were potentially fundamental.
I think it's because they're not having the answers that they want. For example, what they're asking for is, you talk about accessing a 480 million market. And what they're asking for, well, how do we do that? Where is the plan? Where are the surveys? Where's the guidance? That's what they're asking for.
OK, but let's be clear. That's not anything that's contained in the treaty.
That's responsible. That's the government is responsible for that.
No. That's contained in the laws as they already are, long published in the European Union, which many other businesses in the European Union already exploit. So what the government cannot be expected to do is to go to every business in Gibraltar and tell them, this is how you can sell online to ABC. We have to point to any aspects of the rules which will be relevant exclusively to Gibraltar. And that will be in the business manual that we've said that we're going to develop and we're going to publish. But people do also have to do a lot of this work for themselves. I mean, there are some traders who I've been in touch with who are already developing very advanced plans for what they're going to do and are saying to us, this is a great opportunity. We're really pleased that you've been able to negotiate this. This is great for our business. Now, there are others who are in different sectors of business who will need our help. We will be there to help. But what I don't like is the characterization of anger, suggesting that the government has somehow concealed something for longer than it needed to, and that we haven't provided as much as we're able to provide. Even the European Union has not yet got developed some of the forms that people are asking us for. And I understand why people are asking us. Now, the other example is what happened in the United Kingdom, when on the 26th of December, they agreed the TCA, and it came into effect on the 1st of January with new forms, new criteria, and businesses had to adapt. And that was absolutely terrible. And the last thing I would like to do is to put our businesses through the same ringer that Boris Johnson put British businesses through that were exporting to the European Union. We're working really hard to help businesses in Gibraltar.
So the business manual will basically clarify a lot of
the questions that we've been asked. Many of them are now clarified already in the FAQs that we published today on treaty.gov.gi, and many will be clarified in coming days and weeks. And I know that that is suboptimal. I get it. It's not what I wanted. I fully understand. But these are the circumstances in which we are living, and we have to hit the deadline of the 10th of April, because otherwise the alternative is not good. And on top of all that, the deadline of the 10th of April that we're running at breakneck speed to might be extended on the 9th of April, because we've seen the EU in the past say Schengen EES will apply from this day and there's no changing, and then 24 hours before, they extend it by another 6 months. What would you be saying to me if I wasn't working to meet the deadline of the 10th of April and we fell into full application of Schengen Border Code and EES on the morning after?
There's no suggestion at the moment that there will be an extension, though, is there?
There isn't. But look, I give up trying to preempt what the European Commission is going to do. And I think most member states have given up trying to understand whether the Commission will stick to that date or not. for reasons which are also genuine, which is member states are sometimes just unable
are
to
struggling
do
to cope. Chief Minister, one of the things that jumped out at me in the treaty text is that in the past it's been said that Gibraltar keeps all the monies collected from the transaction tax and excise duties, but Spain keeps a percentage of the import duties it collects by way of collection costs.
No, so some of that relates to the administrative charges that there will be, in particular if we have a dispute in relation to charges. But we keep the lion's share of this, and we keep the whole of the common external tariff. That's a lot of money that's going to be coming our way. That's what we're going to use to invest in helping businesses, creating a more secure Gibraltar, investing in infrastructure, beautifying areas of Gibraltar that need beautification and we haven't been able to invest in before. So as I think I told you at lunchtime, we will be investing both in the cosmetic and in the infrastructure of security in Gibraltar, using the new amounts that we expect will come into coffers from the operation of the transaction tax.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it does somebody buying in, a businessman buying in, do they have to pay VAT in the EU, then the transaction tax in Gibraltar?
They will buy VAT free because that is for export from the European Union for tax purposes to Gibraltar. And so therefore the goods can come as they come today without payment of VAT to Algeciras and then consigned to Gibraltar for payment of the transaction tax or into bond, depending on whether the goods go straight onto the market or into bond.
But goods will be more expensive in Gibraltar?
It depends. I don't think necessarily that is the case because there will be goods in Gibraltar that will be subject to the super reduced rate of 5%, which in Spain are subject to the 21%. And in any event, remember this, the 21% or the VAT, such as it may be, for example, in Luxembourg, where it's 17%, is charged as a sales tax on the sales price. So if you're buying a pair of trousers that cost you £100, you pay 21% in Spain, 121 euros, sorry, and 17% in Luxembourg, so 117 euros. Now, the tax in Gibraltar is charged on the import value of the trousers. I have to tell you, sometimes there's a bit of a markup. So the 17% might be on 25 euros or 25 pounds.
OK, Chief Minister, but here's the thing.
So it's a lower tax on a lower price.
OK, but the VAT is paid for ultimately by the consumer. In Spain, businesses will be able to claim back their VAT. There's a provision, there's an inbuilt provision where businesses can claim back VAT. There is no such provision for the transaction tax in Gibraltar.
No, there isn't in Spain a provision where businesses can claim back VAT. The only way that the business claims back VAT is if it doesn't do a sale to a final consumer. Right? So if you're in the chain of VAT, you're passing on that part of the VAT down the chain until it gets paid by the consumer. So you get back through the chain the amount that you had paid through the chain because you're not selling to the ultimate consumer. I think you're talking about consumers getting back VAT when they leave the European Union.
I was actually talking about that. You know about this far more than I do. I was actually talking about businesses being able to reclaim VAT so that in effect they're not actually paying tax. It's
No, because VAT is never paid by a business. VAT is paid, when we're talking about retail, VAT is paid by the ultimate consumer.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, never by
but
the business.
When a consumer,
but
when the business buys in from along the supply chain, it's buying it at a price that has value-added tax, isn't it?
At different stages.
At different stages.
But what it does is it passes it on, and it recovers it by passing it on. Gibraltar businesses are not going to do that. Gibraltar businesses are going to buy only with the 17% on the CIF value, on the import duty
on the customs
valuation,
value,
the customs value, which is therefore a lower tax on a lower sum.
But what businesses are saying, well, hold on a moment, a lot of what we were importing was between 0 and 6% import duty, and now we're looking at least 15%, certainly straight off, and then 17%. So to pick up on Christine's point, many are saying, yes, Gibraltar is going to get more expensive.
Well, they are saying that, but remember that many of these rates that you're talking about today were not 0 to 6% when I became Chief Minister. They were 16 to 12%. And I have progressively been bringing them down. And you know, one of the things that happened was that we monitored the price on the high street as we brought the import duty down. And you know what happened to the price on the high street?
They went up.
Exactly. So actually, some of our traders have had the benefit of lower import duties, but their prices have not come down. Now, many may say, well, the price of the raw material has gone up, etc., etc. In many instances, that is true.
They might say their rent has gone up.
They might say their rent has gone up. And yes, in some instances, some things might cost more. But, this is, in my view, short-term pain for long-term gain, for access to a bigger market. That is why, despite all of those concerns which I genuinely empathize with, the first paragraph of the letter that you were referring to is hugely important, because all of those traders with all of those concerns are nonetheless saying to us, this is the right treaty to do and we want you to do it. Because the alternative was worse.
You did say something about helping businesses. You've said
We
that
will.
before,
Absolutely
financially. Part of the other second letter that the group of business
Well, it's an annex, it's not
organisations,
the second letter.
an annex, talked about a de minimis aid that the EU permits of €300,000, which won't breach state aid rules. Is that something that you'd be looking at?
We're looking at a panoply of different things. I'm writing directly to the traders. I'm not going to respond on your programme. I didn't respond in Parliament today. I'm responding directly to the organisations that wrote to me, and we'll make an announcement about what help we're going to be able to give and how we're going to calibrate that once we've tested it against our own resources and how we think we can fund that and whether there are things that we can and cannot do.
If I can ask one more question before we go to Christine. A lot of traders are concerned that they may no longer be able to afford to bring in British goods, because if it's a British good originating from the UK, it then becomes a non-EU...
No, that's completely wrong.
Oh, is that wrong? OK.
It's completely wrong.
Correct me, please.
So if goods are genuinely British goods, the rate of tax that it pays when it comes from the UK to the EU and Gibraltar is 0. Because the UK has a tariff-free agreement with the EU.
So no import duty?
No, just the 17%. Yeah, as opposed to the 21% in the rest of
17% transaction tax.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
What you're talking about, which concerns them, is not about British goods. It's about goods sold in Britain which are not British goods. That is to say,
from China.
A pair of trousers made in Cambodia, goods made in China, which are then sold in the UK. If those goods would have attracted a common external tariff if they had been imported directly from China or directly from Cambodia to the EU, then they will attract that same tariff when they come from the UK to Gibraltar. That's the only thing. But those aren't British goods, de facto, because they're produced in Bangladesh, in Cambodia or in China.
Well, I mean, one of the issues that has been, it was raised in our Viewpoint a couple of weeks ago, it's also raised in the letter, is there's concern that there'll be a dilution of Britishness in Gibraltar.
Well, I certainly don't think so. First of all, we've bought, I think, 16 or 20 new red pillar boxes. We've bought, I don't know how many new red phone boxes. The Gibraltar Taxi Association have done an excellent job. They believe in Gibraltar. They're investing in Gibraltar. I think there are something like 20 new London black cabs coming to Gibraltar in the next few weeks.
Black chariots of democracy.
London black cabs in Gibraltar. Is that a first?
It is a first. You saw that John Cortez was carrying out the trials. They're electric. Gibraltar is going to feel very, very, very British indeed. And in our high street, I'm sure that people will be able to obtain the best British products, as they always have. But British products are British products, not Chinese products.
But more expensive, maybe?
No, if they're British products...
They won't be.
If they're British products, let's be very clear about this. If they are British products, they will be cheaper in Gibraltar than anywhere else in the European Union, and cheaper than in the UK. Because in the UK, they have 21% VAT. In Europe, anywhere else in Europe except Luxembourg, they'll have 21% VAT. And in Luxembourg, the VAT will be based on the sales price, whilst in Gibraltar it will be placed on the import value. So Gibraltar will be the cheapest place in Europe to buy British, made in the UK, goods. But British, made in China goods might not be so cheap as they are today, but they will still be cheaper than anywhere else in Europe. And let me just make this point, because I think it's important. Some of our British retailers who are making these expressing these concerns and making these complaints operate their British brands outside of Gibraltar, where they pay the same common external tariff and 21% VAT on the sales price, which necessarily means that those products are more expensive. than they will be in Gibraltar. They might be more expensive in Gibraltar in future than they are today, a little bit, but they'll be less expensive than they are in the other shops that these retailers operate outside of our borders, and they still sell because those shops are more successful than the shop here.
But they're competing with other shops that have the same, that have to pay the same VAT.
Yes, and here they're not, because they'll be the only ones.
No, but what I mean is
those
here,
products, so they won't even be competing.
when you have an open frontier, there's nothing stopping people from just going and buying.
Yes, but to buy the same British product, if they go to Spain to buy it, it would be more expensive.
Chief Minister, the termination clause, how does that work? Because there's a line that if Spain asks for termination, the EU would comply. So after all this, could a future Pepe-Vox government just tear up the whole thing?
Not tear it up, but of course every treaty has to have a termination clause. There's no question of a treaty not having a termination clause. The EU can terminate and the UK can terminate. The EU can terminate according to its internal legal order. Spain is just one of 27 member states. If Spain didn't have a preemptive right in the treaty to be listened to by the Commission, then it would be in the same position as Hungary would be in relation to Gibraltar, when Hungary is many thousands of miles away from Gibraltar. And it needs to have, specifically, therefore, a preemptive right over the other member states to deal with this treaty, because, let's face it, this treaty is going to affect Spain more than it's going to affect any other member state. We don't need that in the treaty, but we will have it too. That is to say, if Gibraltar wants to undo this treaty, it will be able to undo this treaty too, because the UK won't ratify this treaty if Gibraltar doesn't want it, and the UK won't stay in this treaty if Gibraltar doesn't want it. And that will be set out in our internal order. In the document that I've referred to in Parliament today is the Concordat that will provide for the circumstances in which Gibraltar will have a similar trigger to be able to undo the treaty should we decide to do so. Now, there can be no question of us entering into a treaty that cannot be undone. Even the Treaty of Utrecht can be undone. All treaties can be undone. They all have clauses that enable termination or circumstances in which they might be terminated. Utrecht, the classic one is the clause in respect of first refusal of the Crown of the United Kingdom or not to want to keep Gibraltar. So there has to be a termination clause in there. Look, we have to work to ensure that no one is going to use that termination clause. I would doubt, in my view, that Partido Popular in future might want to operate the termination clause. There are circumstances, of course, I can imagine, like every Gibraltarian and like you, in which you can see a bloody-minded Spanish government wanting to exercise the termination. But that, of course, will also create issues between and new tensions between the UK and the EU. And so I can't imagine that it's something that would be on a hair trigger at all.
I'm going to caveat this by saying it might be a stupid question, even before I ask it. But could we terminate it by mistake? Because there are quite onerous demands placed on both sides, actually, to actually get it right. And if we don't get it right, that could lead to termination.
Well, but that's not terminating it by mistake. That's failing to comply with obligations. None of the obligations that are there, even the most onerous ones, are ones that we have taken on without believing that we can comply. So the United Kingdom in particular would not enter into an international legal obligation if it was not assured that it or Gibraltar would be able to comply with that international legal obligation. We've therefore stress-tested all of these things in order to be able to proceed, whether it's the time to bring in track and trace on tobacco or any of the other things that we have to do. They are all possible. You know, it's going to be hard. Of course it's going to be hard. But, you know, we choose to go to the moon, investigate and do the other things, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, as
You'll be in the beach, won't you?
Well, not yet.
Retired.
Not yet.
From being chief minister.
Not yet.
You'll leave it all to us. Can we move to travel
I'm
and
never
tourism?
going to leave Gibraltar in the lurch. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not going to go until this is properly done and properly implemented, and that's the commitment I gave you in the John McAfee.
I was just joking.
But soon it will be once more onto the beach, my friends, once more.
Okay, can I...
Sorry, what are the initial 4 years of evaluation? Just before we move on from this, because the other question we wanted to ask is...
we've got to go on to travel and tourism very quickly, sir.
OK, so the initial 4 years of evaluation, what exactly is that?
So remember, that was initially a horizon clause after which there would be termination. That's no longer a termination after 4 years. That's a review of how things are working after 4 years, what can be improved, what might not be improved, which would require, of course, unanimity between the parties to change anything. But it's good that there is a clause there that will will enable us to review how things are working, whether there are things that need to change, without the parties having to rely on termination as a threat to bring about a review.
OK, travel and tourism, very important question. Frontier is going to be open. We can welcome as many people as possible, but where are they going to park? How are they going to travel within Gibraltar?
Well, that's a question that John Cortes is doing a lot of work on to ensure that we don't get greater gridlock. There'll soon be, I hope, new park and ride opportunities. There'll be new ways to move people around Gibraltar. One of the things that we've had to look at very quickly, but which is very helpful for the purposes of this, is what do we do with the number of tourists who want to go up the rock now that we haven't got the cable car? And again, working with the Taxi Association, we've been able to have new mechanisms that will enable us to move people along the Upper Rock Nature Reserve in a way that's sustainable and environmentally friendly, on which John Cortes and Christian Santos have been working with the GTA. That will help us with the problem in the first 3 years once the cable car is being redeveloped. And it's the sort of solution that we hope to implement to be able to get many people through and around Gibraltar in the new circumstances in which we expect many people will want to come.
How soon will the park and ride be ready, do you think?
It's not something that I can give you any timeline on.
OK.
Gibraltar, when coming into the airport, won't be subject to coercive controls by the Schengen authorities. Coercive controls, why the word coercive?
That's a huge win. Coercive controls are the terminology of Schengen. It's highfalutin lawyer talk for arrest and detention. And therefore, what we've been able to ensure is that no Gibraltar resident, obviously what matters most to me is the Gibraltarian, but no Gibraltar resident will be subject to arrest or detention by the Schengen authorities, that is to say the Spanish authorities, when they're returning to Gibraltar, even if there is a Schengen information coercive alert for them. That is to say, even if there's a Schengen arrest warrant for you, there's a different mechanism which enables the Gibraltar authorities to take over those moments if they involve a Gibraltar resident, and then an extradition procedure, instead of a Gibraltarian being subject to arrest by a Schengen, that is to say Spanish, officer in this context.
Chief Minister, I'm very conscious of the fact that you have been inundated with interview requests, and I know that you're going off to do another interview now, so we'll bring the Viewpoint to a close. But you have promised us that you will come back and answer further questions, and we will be having more reactions in Viewpoint as the weeks go by. But just before you do go away, I just want to ask you about, where you see Gibraltar in 5 years' time.
Well, you see, I think that if you look at this treaty and you're looking at it through the filter, which we have to look at the treaty through today, of the problems that businesses say they're going to have and how we're going to deal with it, what are the new facilities we're going to build, how are these things going to work at the airport, I blame you not one jot at all for asking me all those questions and intensely questioning me on them. We have to do that exercise, but we also have to look beyond. And that's the opportunity that you're giving me now. I'd like you to think of two scenarios. Look beyond today, 5 years down the road, and see Gibraltar without this treaty, behind the wall of the Schengen Border Code and the EES and all of those difficulties. Look at Main Street, empty most days, desolate, and look at our services industry, finding it so difficult to bring people in, or with us having to bow our heads and accept that there should be a waving through system for Spanish workers to be able to come into Gibraltar, whilst we, however, have to subject ourselves to the EES and the Schengen Border Code. That is, we give up reciprocity and we accept that others can come into Gibraltar with no checks, but we have to subject ourselves to checks. And then look at the alternative, which is this treaty. And look at the vibrancy that this can bring to our economy. Look at what it can do for our retail sector in Main Street. I hope to be walking down Main Street 5 years from now, unburdened from office in my flip-flops and with the tan that Mr. Bocino was referring to, I managed to acquire over the midterm break. And to have our traders say, you made the right call. We were right to support you. And to have the services industry in Gibraltar flourishing. And to see that new residents to Gibraltar are people who are really bringing something positive to Gibraltar. They're helping us with what we do in Gibraltar, not becoming a drain on our public finances and on our public services. And that Gibraltar, that vibrant, positive, growing Gibraltar, is the Gibraltar that I want for my children and for my children's children. A Gibraltar that gives them access to the European continent and to the United Kingdom. That their British passport with their Gibraltar ID card will be the most valuable in the world. access to Europe, access to the United Kingdom, and through the United Kingdom to the rest of the world. That is what we've been fighting for, and my goodness, if Joseph and Michael and the rest of the teams helped us to get there.
Chief Minister, thank you very much for coming in. On that note, we'll say goodbye to you for now, but hopefully we'll see you again. We have a series of programmes planned for Gibraltar today, for GBC News and interviews, and also for Viewpoint in the coming weeks. Next week on Viewpoint, we'll be getting some reactions to the treaty. So we'll be hearing from the opposition leader. I'll also be speaking to the Police Commissioner, Owain Richards. So please do join us next week at the same time on Viewpoint. Good night.